I'm Scott Hollander, the Executive Director of KidsVoice, and I'm so glad that people could join us tonight. So we have the opportunity to thank our supporters and donors for what they've helped us to accomplish in this very challenging year, and to be able to share with you how our staff and organization has responded to COVID-19's impact on our work and our clients. As many of you may know, we represent over 3,000 clients each year who are involved in abuse and neglect cases in juvenile court. Over 2,000 of them are placed in foster homes or group homes. Others remain or become reunified with their parents who are working to address the issues that led to that family's involvement in court. And then we also stay with our clients until they turn 25. So even after their case is closed, we help them with housing and credit, Social Security issues, transitioning into the adult mental health or disability system, which is so critical for children who, well, any child of any family often has a safety net from their family. If something gets, things get difficult, they need help. Our clients tend to not have that, and KidsVoice plays a bit of that role until their 25th birthday. So when the pandemic hit and schools and businesses closed, it took quite the toll on our clients. Many of them rely on school. Maybe that's where they get a school breakfast and lunch, and it's their only meal of the day. It may be that that's where they get their medical care because they rely on a school nurse and don't often get to a doctor otherwise. It may be the only place that's safe for them, where they can be with family, with their friends or with teachers, and their home environment isn't so supportive. It also took a toll on our foster parents and, of course, parents themselves. But our foster parents, when they take in a sibling group of 3 children, for example, they didn't sign up for 24/7 care. They expected children to go to school, to go to daycare, to play sports after school, to have weekend visits with their families as their parents worked to getting them back, and having those kinds of breaks. In addition, as many of you experienced, this has been a very stressful time. Not knowing about the health risks, not being able to get food as easily as you would like, or toilet paper or other household supplies. So imagine trying to do that for your own family plus a sibling group of 3 that you've brought in. And that doesn't take into account that many of our foster families were at risk of the economic impact. Many of them worked in service industries where they were not able to work, or were there's a threat of losing their job. Some of them were grandparents who are in their 60s and more vulnerable to COVID and taking care of children. All of this was a recipe for our foster parents to say, I'm not doing this. Please take these kids away. And if that were to happen, we had nowhere to put them. There was just an interesting article nationally about the lack of foster parents that are available. People are not jumping up and down in the pandemic to take strangers into their home, particularly children who didn't work out in other people's homes. So that's been a big challenge. Plus, many of our clients have suffered trauma from the physical abuse or sexual abuse they suffered and require mental health support and other services. Well, they couldn't go to their therapists or go to group therapy during the pandemic. Some of them were not in homes that had Wi-Fi, and they couldn't access telehealth or telemental health. So these were all sorts of pressures. And that's before you even get to the pressure on foster parents and the pressure on many of you who are here in attendance tonight of having to take care of your children's education. So now they had jobs they were trying to hold down, all of those pressures, and particularly for younger children, having to make sure they could get online or had devices and could follow up with school. So it was just an intensive time. So our staff had to shift gears. Our court was closed except for emergency motions and for new removals. And what our staff decided to do was put together a very focused and concerted effort to reach out to each child. We couldn't wait for the cases to cycle in every 3 months, as they tend to do, and make that when we would sort of check in and follow up on our cases. We had to reach out immediately as this hit to check in with each of the children, their caregivers, and make sure that they had what they need. That might have been Wi-Fi for school. It might have been helping foster parents receive stimulus checks or apply for unemployment. Be able to get Wi-Fi, let them know about telehealth and telemental health so we can get supports for the children or perhaps for the caregivers themselves. If they needed help with school, we did that. We took a number of our staff and made them designated experts various school districts where our children are. Many of you had to deal with one school in one school district for your children, or maybe 2 or 3. But our clients are in over 50 different school districts. There are 43 in Allegheny County, and plus some of our clients are placed in districts outside the county in group homes and foster homes when they live out there. So we designated staff who could more efficiently address those things. The other thing that happened is over the summer, the Pennsylvania Department of Education issued a guidance that required districts who did not provide special education services completely through the year due to the pandemic to have to provide recoupment services to special education children who didn't have the requirements of their IEPs, their individualized education plans met. So our staff, again, learned about this and quickly sprung into action, and over the summer identified those clients who would be eligible, reached out to school districts to try to make that start to happen. And now we're in the second cycle. We also reached out to, well, I should add, we also reached out to every client at the beginning of the school year to make sure that they were set, because if they needed anything to be able to be successful, as schools are struggling to meet children's needs, and a lot of our clients don't have the kind of support that maybe some of you and your children have. And we're about to start that again now at the end of the first quarter. How did that go? Are our students behind? To check in with the teachers, check in with the caregivers, check in with our clients to see what they may need for the second quarter as things are shifting again. And some schools are moving into a hybrid model from being totally online, including our biggest district, Pittsburgh Public Schools, starting that on November 9th. The other thing that's happened during this time is all those pressures we talked about on foster parents. That's true for families who are at risk but are not already in the system. Everyone believes, experts across the country, that in this environment, there's far more abuse, child abuse, spousal abuse, and intimate partner violence because of all these pressures that people are feeling during this time. But the problem is no one's seeing it. It's invisible because most of the reporting of abuse that comes to the attention of the authorities comes from mandated reporters, teachers, clergy, coaches, even sometimes friends and family who aren't mandated reporters. Many of them are not seeing children as much as they were before. And so that's created even more of an issue. Interestingly, there are programs, like we have child advocacy centers in a couple of our hospitals in Pittsburgh that are specialists in very significant cases of child abuse. So these are medical experts who can determine whether or not the medical evidence supports the parent's story about how the injury occurred in a severe physical abuse case. They have forensic psychologists who are skilled in interviewing traumatized children about what happened for serious cases of sexual abuse or those who witnessed horrible physical abuse. But those cases weren't coming in. So those medical facilities had capacity and they weren't being paid for those visits. So we reached out to the county and to Children's Hospital's Child Advocacy Center because we needed more capacity. We used this time when we weren't in court to get up to date on all of our clients' medical records and mental health records. But we often needed help to understand them or figure out what to do when it looked like there was a problem. And so we asked the county if they would amend the contract with Children's Hospital to do those child abuse investigations to allow Children's to work with KidsVoice to help us with our cases, understand those records, and provide telehealth to our clients and to their caregivers. It was a huge success in several ways, in that we now had access, and from that we've got to the point now where the county recognizes the value of that and has been very supportive, and is going to now take what was only going to go through June 30th and is funding it for the whole year again. That was June 30th of this past year. So until June 30th of 2021, we now have funding in place with the cooperation of the county to do that. Interestingly, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services heard about that arrangement and what we were doing during COVID with these child advocacy centers, which happen all over the country. And they asked Children's and KidsVoice to present to a federal group that was comprised of the state child advocacy center representatives from every state in the country, and to hear about this partnership and how other states could do the same thing and use that capacity to help during the pandemic. The other partnership we did with the county that was terrific dealt with our clients who turned 21 while they were in foster care. On your 21st birthday, you get to leave your foster home or group home and go live on your own. That's what happens when you leave foster care. You're expected to be able to then have your own job, take care of yourself completely when you've had no role model, no family support, no safety net. That's tough enough for our clients aging out of foster care when unemployment is at 2% or 3% as it was earlier in the year. But when things changed with the pandemic and people were laid off, and now there were plenty of qualified, experienced people for any job that our clients would be looking for, it was virtually impossible for them to be able to get employment, to live on their own, to be successful, not end up homeless and at risk of COVID. We quickly looked at all of our clients over about a 5-month period who were going to age out of foster care at 21. And we went to the county with specific plans about what each of those children would need, whether it was to stay in their foster home or go to a particular setting where there was an apartment available, what the cost would be, and ask the county if they might be willing to allow them to stay in those placements or pay for those living situations beyond 21. The county did not bat an eye and immediately said yes, they would do that. We had offered to go to the feds and try to see if the feds would create a waiver for the federal reimbursement for those over 21 youth that was supposed to end at 21. The county said that would be great, but even if that didn't happen, they would fund this. And we went to the feds and asked them for that waiver, and they told us there was a way to do that. And in fact, they then published, it was moved, the states could elect a certain category of funding that I won't go into the details of, and they could shift dollars over to that funding and continue to provide that support for those youth. And they published a guidance federally for other states to be able to do the same thing. So those are two areas where we had terrific support and innovation from the county in a very difficult time that led to other solutions in other places beyond just our clients. The one other thing I want to share with you tonight is some data analysis from our education work and in our representation of our clients in magistrate district judge summary offense cases. I'll call those MDJ cases, or magistrate district judge cases. These are minor criminal offenses for which you can't go to jail. But if my children, or if you have young children, they were to do something silly like, if my kid took a beer to a football game and got caught, they'd end up going before the MDJ, or someone might have a disturbing the peace charge or something along those lines. Very minor, couldn't go to jail, but you go to these cases in court, and if I were to show up looking like I do now, or bringing a lawyer for a child, chances are they would get no consequence, or maybe community service, and they would have no criminal record. But when our clients don't show up for those hearings, or they show up with a poor attitude and don't have the kind of support that we do for our kids, they end up with a guilty charge, which means they have a criminal record, and a $300 fine plus $150 court costs, a $450 debt that they can't pay. Now they end up with a credit issue and a criminal record that stays with them for their life when they may apply for a job or try to get housing. So we've been taking on that representation for some time now. I should also add that if you don't pay that fine, then you can go to jail for failure to comply with that court order. So I'm going to share my screen. I want to show you some data here. Bear with me just a second. If I can make this work. Okay. Can you see that? Just nod if, okay, I got a thumbs up. So this is showing our data over a 6-year period, that essentially what you see here is that for the clients we represented in those MDJ cases, we had a 74% success rate, meaning they were found not guilty or the charges are dismissed or withdrawn. For other dependent youth, same time, same ages, same period, 36%. So more than double the success rate just for having the representation from KidsVoice. And avoiding those fines, avoiding those criminal records. Okay, so then we look at rearrest rate. So the interesting thing here is this is saying after you have that MDJ case, how many of those youth were rearrested then within these time periods, 6, 12, and 36 months. At 6 months, only 3% of our clients, whoops, I went too far. Only 3% of our clients were rearrested versus 15% of the control group for the same time period. 6% at 12 months for KidsVoice clients versus 19% and 18% at 36 months versus 29%. So that was encouraging to see as well in terms of our representation and the impact it had. Now, if you take both of those pieces of information, they come together in this way. So this data looks at how many clients, what percentage of our clients ended up with no MDJ record because they weren't found guilty and were not rearrested. So they never ended up with a criminal record or a fine that they had to pay. And that showed that we had a 64% rate versus a 26% rate on the control group side. And in fact, we just got some new information from the county that I didn't have time to get a new slide together that shows that our rate actually has now gone up to 68%. So we're really pleased to see those numbers, because that's the name of the game. The reason we do that is to give them the kind of opportunities for the future so they can get jobs, get housing, become independent as they leave foster care. One other piece I'll show you is about race. The vast majority of the MDJ charges are against Black males. In our cases, for our Black male clients, we have a 65% success rate. So 65% of the Black male KidsVoice clients received a not guilty charge or had the charges dismissed or withdrawn versus 29% of Black males in the control group. So that's what I want to show about the MDJ side. On the education outcomes, I wanted to just briefly say this. Of our 3,000 clients a year, we have over 200 for whom they have no parent involved in their education. And so KidsVoice ends up being appointed as a last resort to be the educational decision maker, to step into the shoes of the parent, to sign for attendance, to go to school, to participate in special education issues, to address anything that comes up in that child's educational life. So for those clients, the county did a data analysis because they can tie into school attendance, GPA, and suspension/discipline issues. And looking at the data for the year before we were involved, the year we first became involved, and the year after that, this is what it showed, that 44% of our clients improved their school attendance, 53% improved their GPA, and 17% decreased their suspensions. So we were really encouraged by this. And I also want to just, one caution is that while it is encouraging, it should be treated as preliminary because there was only complete 3-year data for 70 youth for that measured period. So our sample is pretty small, but it's still something that we've been happy to be able to show. So I'll stop sharing and get back to this. So I just wanted to really just conclude in saying a couple of things. One, I want to thank our staff. Our staff are the ones that did this work. They deserve tremendous credit for making this happen at a time when everything was uncertain in their lives too. They were dealing with their health, their family's health. Many of them have young children and they're trying to figure out their education, and they were able to step up and be innovative about this. And they were able to do that because of the support of many of you who are donors and supporters of KidsVoice and have helped to make this happen. So you deserve that credit as well. And it's really critical to have that support at this time during COVID, when many nonprofits are struggling, when many families are struggling, and we're waiting for everyone's really waiting for the hammer to fall here next month, because many of you may know the state, Pennsylvania passed a 5-month state budget that just continued its spending at the regular rate in every department. It's unsustainable, and they're going to issue a new budget that will be drastically reduced for the final 7 months of the year that start December through June. And the Department of Human Services for Pennsylvania is likely to take a big hit, maybe 20% or more. And those will be passed on to cuts in county contracts and services for children, including potentially services like KidsVoice. So having your support is so critical during this time. So I'm not here to whine about that when we have our very own wine expert who can talk to us about some really wonderful things for the fall. I just want to take this opportunity to thank you, and I'll turn things over to Matthew Kurtas, who's the sommelier at the Edgeworth Club, and is going to tell us a little more about wines for the fall. Thank you all for your support and for being here tonight to hear about KidsVoice and have some fun with us as well.
Well, Scott, thank you so much, and really just informative, beautiful, wonderful things happening. And if I can echo and rally the call I'd like to, for all of those of you at home, you can see us as panelists. We can't see you. Please raise a glass if you have one in front of you while we enjoy this wine tonight, to Scott, to Garth, and to the whole team at Kids Voice, and raise a glass also to yourself for making this happen. I'm going to now share my screen while you all have a toast, and I'm going to just look to my co-presenters here to make sure that I've got my screen up and everyone's able to see it. If I can get a nod from my co-presenters or a thumbs up that this is now arrived. Excellent. Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the general session for the Kids Voice Digital Wine School, also called the Wine School a la Couch for those of you who speak French and are sitting on the couch. Tonight, what we're going to do is just answer a couple questions asked in advance about what's coming up in the markets for fall wine, what kind of tips and tricks can I integrate into my home, and how can I enjoy wine throughout the fall. I hope that this is educational and fun for you as much as it is for me. Once more, my name is Matthew Kurtas, and I'm a certified sommelier, which means I can taste wine with a blindfold on and tell you the region, the year, and those kinds of things. But more importantly, I share my passion for wine and help others develop their own passions for wine, which is truly the best part of my job. So today, you all share a common passion, and that's Kids Voice. So we're going to marry the two and talk about some fall wine trends. So happy fall, y'all. Today we're going to talk about pairing wine and food. What are some neat little tricks that you can keep up your sleeve here when you're having your next party, even if it's a small COVID gathering. Next, I like to call this section, how do I use my fridge wine? And I've had people ask me before, and even in the last session, how long can you keep wine in the fridge for? And if it's past that point, what can you do with it? Lastly, for those of you who are in the state of Pennsylvania, which is many of you, I know a few of you are tuning in from Texas, what can we look forward to from the state store and the state system as it relates to purchases for this fall season? So firstly and foremost, pairing wine with food. Relationships is really at the heart of wine and food pairing, and here we have two different interesting friendships on the screen. On the upper left, ladies and gentlemen, you'll see Batman and Robin. I hope you're at home nodding your heads and you do notice these two characters. On the lower right, maybe a little bit harder to distinguish, but for those of you who've seen the newer Bond movies, Quantum Solace, Casino Royale, you'll recognize Daniel Craig as James Bond and his buddy, Q. And Q is the poignant intellectual. James Bond is, of course, the courageous, bold field agent. What we have here is kind of a tale of two cities or a tale of two relationships. And all food and wine pairing is very much like these two relationships. So in the case of Batman and Robin, we have a complementary relationship. Notice this is complementary with an E, because like we have complementary angles in geometry, these are two things that come together to make the whole. And this is when they walk in the same direction to create a similar initiative. So when flavors align, or you have a flavor in the wine which is also in the food, that's called a complementary pairing. Now, in the case of Daniel Craig as James Bond and Q, the poignant brainiac, we have a contrasting wine and food pairing. These are when opposites in the chemistry of the wine or the chemistry of the food create an interesting conversation or balance one another out. This is a yin and a yang effect, and it's when the elements mix to create something totally new, whereas the complementary just builds up the existing. So I hope that everyone's got a clarity on the different types of pairings. We're going to dig a little bit deeper now. In terms of complementary pairings, when we refer to the body of our dish or the body of our wine, this is one of the simplest mantras that sommeliers will use if they are guiding someone in their restaurant towards the appropriate pairing. If you're enjoying a red wine, you might enjoy it with a red meat or a large protein. Red meats or even fish that bleed red, like a tuna steak, are high in myoglobin. Myoglobin is in the liquid, in the protein, and it's very unctuous. It creates a flavor experience we call umami or full bodiness. So red wines, which have a full bodiness from their tannin and from their maceration period, these wines go great with red meat, and white wines, we often say white meat or fish. So this is just a simple, easy to remember rule of thumb, and we can get more complex than that. As a matter of fact, we can also start to have complementary flavor pairings. So if the wine is expressive of berries and fruits, We might use the same exact berries and fruits we're smelling or tasting in the sauce or the chutney for a dish. A great example would be if you're going to be serving a Cabernet Sauvignon, which is heavy in blackberry notes. And even if you can't detect that, you can always read the back label and it'll tell you a little bit. Then you might do a blackberry gastrique, or have some blackberries reduced down in your demi-glace that you're going to put on your venison or whatever meat you're having that evening. Another complementary flavor might be if there are herbaceous notes in the wine. Sauvignon Blanc is a great example of an herbaceous white wine, often has a grassiness to it. You might implement herbs like rosemary or parsley or thyme into marinades or rubs on the chicken or the fish, which are going together with this. Once more, this is complementary because we have the same flavor in the wine as we have in the food. Point of clarification, there isn't rosemary blended into the wine. It's just that the species of grape, after we've pressed it and we allow the yeast to work with the juice, produces chemical compounds. And the chemical compounds at the molecular level, if you were to look underneath of a microscope, are actually identical, despite the fact that there was never any rosemary thrown into the vat. So this is quite interesting that species of plants have the same chemical compounds in them, but they're only expressed through the process of fermentation. One more for the road, oakiness, creaminess. Think of those Napa Valley buttery Chardonnays, cheese sauces, creaminess, milk, anytime that you have a cream in a pasta sauce or something like that. Or even certain types of shellfish, which you love to dip in. You got it, ladies and gentlemen, butter. Anytime you have this, using an oaky or a creamy textured wine are going to deliver a beautiful complementary pairing. So when it comes to contrasts, we are shifting from Batman and Robin over to James Bond and Q. What we're going to look at now is not necessarily the flavors we smell in the wine, but perhaps measurable things about the wine. So an example on the left, if something is high in acid, we perceive that as tanginess. It makes our mouths water. So Pinot Grigio is a white wine that's very crisp. It's refreshing. And we use the term crisp often when we're referring to something high in acid. It almost makes the sides of your taste buds here on the side of your tongue water a little bit just thinking about it. Acidic foods have a tendency to do this. Acid, in the case of Pinot Grigio, would be malic acid or tartaric acid. They're chemical compounds in the grapes, are going to balance out and contrast anything that's high in fat or creamy, which is why a crisp white wine and a spaghetti carbonara go great together. Tannic, wines which are high in tannins, make your mouth feel dry. So a tannic wine might be Malbec or Cabernet Sauvignon or a red Bordeaux. These wines have a character to them which is heavy, and it makes each taste bud feel bristly. Almost the same sensation as if you just ate a green banana. Think about that, where you can feel a chalkiness or a dustiness. This is a naturally occurring compound in plants, specifically seeds and skins, that when it is extracted into the juice of the grape, into the wine, often makes this sensation of astringency. So big tannic wines do great with heavy umami dishes. Think mushrooms that have been roasted in butter with thyme. That's an excellent pairing with a tannic wine. Now, lastly, wines which have residual sugar, like dessert wines, or wines that are intentionally fermented with leftover sugar, like Rieslings from Germany, pair together well with salty foods like blue cheeses or spicy foods like Thai foods. This is because spicy foods contain a chemical called capsaicin. Fun to say, difficult to remember. Once more, capsaicin. And capsaicin binds to your taste buds and pokes them repeatedly. So when you have wines that have leftover sugar in them intentionally, like a dessert wine, a Riesling, a Gewürztraminer, or a Pinot Blanc, these wines coat your palate with a thin layer of sugar, which prevent the capsaicin from irritating your palate. Sweet and spicy go together quite well. This is the essence of a James Bond pairing. And lastly, but not leastly, champagne goes with everything. If you are pairing wine with appetizers, if you are pairing wine with food, you cannot go wrong to bring bubbles to the table or to your next gathering. Champagne, particularly dry champagne, is a guaranteed home run virtually in every instance. It has a perfect amount of acidity. It often has a flavor or character that's round due to the barrel aging process that we use in champagne or in many sparkling wines. So A few notes as you get ready for autumn. Here are a few regions, and for those of you who have tuned in for the prior presentation, you're aware that all of these slides will be distributed to you through Garth as a PDF, so feel no need to take screenshots, pull out your phone, or take a picture. You'll have all of these things documented for you. As we move towards the season of turkey and casseroles and pan sauces, a few wines that you might think towards would be an Austrian or a New York State Gewürztraminer. That's a fun one to say. I'll say it once more, Gewürztraminer. It means green spice in German or Austrian tongue. This is a wine which is incredibly fragrant and floral on the nose, smells like lychees and rose petals, and it also has high acidity, so it goes great with cheeses, it goes great with cream sauces. As we move into the red wines, Beaujolais is a classic fall red wine. Beaujolais is a tiny little village in the region of Burgundy in eastern France, where they grow one grape and one grape only for reds. It's called Gamay. So those in Beaujolais make wines of Gamay, and Gamay is released once a year in the fall, just after harvest, in a style we call Beaujolais Nouveau. There are also Beaujolais wines which are released on a year-round basis after being matured in barrels and held before release. We call these regional Beaujolais. They're much harder to find in Pennsylvania, but they actually express quite nicely like the other Pinot Noirs and Burgundy and Reds. Lastly, because there's an earth-based characteristic from cold weather Pinot Noir, we always recommend French Burgundy or Oregonian Pinot Noirs for those who prefer a fruitier version in the autumn. So ladies and gentlemen, what do I do with that fridge wine? Or in the case of those of you who have red or have room temperature, it might be countertop wine. These are just a few creative uses, one slide, nothing more. We don't want to use up too much of your time, but consider the following. You have a bottle of white wine left in the fridge. It's been a little bit more than a week. It doesn't smell bad, but it just doesn't taste as good. Pour it into an ice cube tray. You could add a little bit of sugar if you care to. You don't have to. Put it in the freezer, and the next time that you make a Manhattan or you make something that you want, an old-fashioned gets a little bit of sweetness, as the ice melts in your cocktail, the flavor of the drink begins to express the flavors in the wine. And because you're not drinking the wine as a pure expression of itself, you're not terribly concerned with if it is typical for the region or as fresh as can be. This is a great way to repurpose fridge wine. As we move closer and closer to the colder weather, we had our first frosts here in Pittsburgh recently. I know those of you in Texas are sunbathing right now while you listen to this, so you're excluded. But consider hot wine or spiced and mulled wine with the addition of sliced oranges, anise, cinnamon sticks, nutmeg, or clove. The predominant features of the wine are actually going to wash out. And so that oxidation that might have taken place while the red wine was on your countertop will be barely noticeable because of all of the baking spices. This isn't to say that spiced mulled wine isn't better if you make it with a fresh bottle, but I think that we can all do our part in being more sustainable and responsible about how we drink our used wine. Lastly, as we move forward on the top row, autumn sangrias or punches. Once more, there's a recurring theme here, mixing the wine in an altered format with other ingredients. Not necessarily to mask, just as we learned about complementary pairings, also to highlight what's really great about the wine, even at this stage. In terms of applying heat, pan sauces, using that fridge wine or that countertop wine after you've sauteed some chicken, get rid of the extra grease. All you got to do is hit your pan with some flour, and you throw in a splash of that wine and whisk constantly, and you have yourself a beautiful pan sauce. And my absolute favorite, if you end up with an abundance of desktop wine, countertop wine, or fridge wine, is the French coq au vin. If you have not prepared this before, it is much simpler than it looks or sounds. It's fancy speak for cooked in wine. And traditionally, it's made with dark meat chicken, but you can also use light meat. You can use different proteins. For those of you who have been to a melting pot restaurant, they have their own version of coq au vin that you do tableside. I highly recommend, if you do often have fridge wine or countertop wine, just look up a recipe for coq au vin. Don't try to make it the best coq au vin you've ever made. Just try to make it to begin with, and then improve it each time that you do it. Number one, it's going to give you a reason to open up more wine. And number two, you'll find yourself more resourceful, enjoying a stick-to-your-ribs meal in cooler weather. So as we make our way to the finish line here, we had a specific request from the group regarding the chairman's selections or specific wines that are either coming to market or in market in Pennsylvania. The specific program that we look to is called the Chairman's Selections. So for those of you who receive the regular circulars from the LCB, you might have seen this section of the circular, or you might have been on the LCB's website, finewineandgoodspirits.com, but you may become aware of the chairman's selections. These are special wines that are picked by sommeliers who work for the state of Pennsylvania. What a great government job to have, by the way. And these wines fit a couple different areas. Some are what we call SLO, and that's not slow because they take forever to get to your house. That stands for special liquor order, meaning they aren't traditionally warehoused everywhere in the state, and they might need to be transported to your nearest state store before you can pick them up. Secondly, chairman's selections are often available both in-store and online if you go to the website. Chairman's selections aren't always the highest price. They're also not always the best value, but there are a couple sweet spots in there. We're going to give you some cheat codes a little bit later in the presentation. And lastly, these are often wines that the state procurement offices have either overboarded or they overestimated how much they'd be able to sell. So they're looking to move the inventory before the next vintage comes in, because the state does purchase wine on contracts and it has made pledges to purchase a certain number of cases. If they find themselves with enough 2015 on their hands and they need to get 2016 on the shelves in a week, 2015 goes on sale, or it becomes a chairman's selection. So in the name of White Wines for Thanksgiving, and once more, these slides will be distributed to you digitally in PDF format by Garth. We do recommend the 2019 Albanta Albarino. Sobre lías is Spanish for over the lees, which means that the yeast which fermented the wine died and fell to the bottom of the barrel, and the wine stayed in that barrel for an extended period of time. What does this do? Well, the lees, or the dissolved yeast, which sinks to the bottom, offer a roundness, a creaminess, or a full-bodiedness to this wine, whereas Albarino is traditionally incredibly crisp and light in body. Albarino over the lees, or sobre lías, is a wonderful expression, and at $12 a bottle, you'll be hard-pressed to find a better crisp white wine to serve at your Thanksgiving dinner. For those of you who enjoy more full-bodied wines, the 2016 Beringer Luminous Chardonnay is currently going at $20 a bottle under this program. To find Napa Valley Chardonnay at $20 a bottle isn't hard, but to find good Napa Valley Chardonnay at $20 a bottle is. So this would be my pick for you. You're welcome to order it again through the state store. I'm in no way supported or endorsed by the state store. I just felt that for those of you who are in the state and you find it can be confusing to find wine or get access to good wine, that this might be nice to keep in your tool belt. In the name of red wines, we have selected here for you, or I've selected here for you, 3 different wines from 3 different regions, each of them expressing something different. So for Thanksgiving, think of that dark meat turkey. There's a gravy and those vegetables. Oh, maybe green bean casserole. I'm not sure what you make at your house, but I know we always have it at mine. The Domaine de Languedoc is a beautiful Rhone red wine. This is a blend of grapes. Specifically, Grenache is the leading grape, which is a dried and jammy red. And this wine is available in both 2015 and 2016 vintages at $20 a bottle. So I did select this for today's list. Next would be the 2015 Contino Rioja Reserva. This comes to us from Spain, and at $30 a bottle, you can expect a minimum of 3 years aging before it was released to the market. So reserve wines from Rioja come to us after having a year in the barrel, 2 years on the shelf, before they're even sold to stores like the state stores in Pennsylvania or the distributors even in Europe. So before the wine hit market, it was already 2018. So any of these left on shelves are 5 years aged. They are drinkable now, and they express a wonderful balance of red fruits and earth. The 2016 Resonance Pinot Noir from Yamhill, Carlton, Oregon is an earthy and fruity expression of Pinot Noir for those of you who appreciate it. I believe we had somebody who reported they were drinking Mayomi this evening, which is a California expression. This would be dramatically different from what you're used to, but delicious nonetheless. I highly recommend it with a slice of pumpkin pie and a dollop of Cool Whip.
That's it, and have a great rest of the evening and the rest of your wine, and enjoy the rest of your cheese. Bye.
Good night.